We've already mentioned that splits are part of the housekeeping work that the MongoOS does. But how does the MongoOS decide that a chunk needs to be split? How does that actually happen? Well, there's a heuristic or algorithm in the code whereby the MongoOS tracks writes to chunks. Keeps track of all the chunks it's aware of, keeps track of how much data has been written to those individual chunks. And when it sees that enough data has been written to a particular chunk, it decides to split it. Now, the actual mechanics of this are a little bit more involved than I'm about to make out, but these are good rough guidelines. So when MongoOS sees that about 20% of the max chunk size, which remember is 64 megs, so 20% of it will be 12 to 13 megs of data. So when it sees that this much has been done, it says, okay, we're going to check to see if there are actually places where this chunk can be split, and it sends a command called split vector, which is an internal command, but it sends it down to the shard that actually owns that chunk. It sends it to the shard primary. It says, here's a range of data. Please tell me if it's splittable, or if it should be split. And if it can be split, tell me which points it should be split at. So the shard primary here will take a look at that range of data, see what size the data is in there, see how many documents are in there. Size is not the only thing that a split can be triggered on. It can also be triggered on the number of documents. I think 250,000 is sort of the magic number there. And what it will do is it will calculate the appropriate split points to chop that range of data up into more manageable chunks, and it will primarily return a list of split points to the MongoOS. Now, if there's no split points to be had, in other words, there hasn't actually been enough data written to this chunk to trigger a split, then it just returns an empty list, and the MongoOS goes no further. So, primary returns a list of split points. The MongoOS says, great, fantastic. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to update the metadata to reflect that split. In effect, it's going to split that chunk into multiple points based on this list that has been returned to it, update that metadata on the config servers, and henceforth that chunk will be split into multiple chunks. Worth noting, no data is moved and no data has changed. So all that's really happened here is that the MongoOS has queried this primary and said, hey, I think you might have a chunk that I would like to split. Can you have a look at it and tell me if there are valid split points in there? When the primary returns a list of those split points, it says perfect, and it will perform that split, update the metadata, and should the primary return no split points, the MongoOS will just basically back off, won't do anything, and it'll wait until another 20% has been written. So this basically becomes 40% since it was a split, and it will try again at 40%. Now the one thing that some people miss here is that there can be lots of MongoOSs. They're all going to be doing the same thing. They're going to track to see how much data is written to a particular chunk. Once each MongoOS sees 20% of the data has been written to that particular chunk, it will send the split vector down to the primary. Only one of them will actually perform the split. They might all try to do it at roughly the same time. If you've got a very even distribution of writes across your MongoOSs, you could have multiple MongoOSs attempted at approximately the same time, but only one of them will actually perform the split, and after that the rest will refresh their cache of config data and restart all the tracking once the splits have been done. So this is how a MongoOS basically decides to split something. And just to note, of course, this is the auto version, is the automatic splitting that's going on here.